Picture this. You're a young bride named Margot, barely 15 winters old, standing in the doorway of a stone cottage in 1347. Your new husband, Henrik, approaches the marriage bed. The rushes beneath your bare feet crackle with each step. Candlelight flickers across his weathered face. He's nearly twice your age, chosen by your father for 3 pigs and half an acre of barley. Outside, his friends are drunk on ale, banging pots with wooden spoons and shouting crude encouragements. They won't leave until they hear proof of consummation. Your hands tremble around the rough wool shift your mother stitched for this very night, the same one she wore and her mother before her. When Henrik's calloused fingers reach for the leather cord at your throat, you wonder if your mother's hushed warnings about wifely duties could possibly prepare you for what comes next in this cramped, smoky room that smells of wet wool and unwashed bodies. This is not a love story. This is the reality of medieval intimacy, a world shaped by superstition, religious terror, and survival. Bodies were political territories, bedrooms were public arenas. Even the most private moments were governed by rules so restrictive they'd make modern skin crawl. Before we dive in, if you like uncovering the hidden truths of history, tap like, subscribe, and tell me where you're watching from. It's wild that we can examine the past together from all over the world. In medieval Europe, the marriage bed was never purely private. The community, the church, and the weight of custom all had a stake in what happened between husband and wife. Margot's wedding night began long before any touch. There was the bedding ceremony, guests shepherding the couple to their chamber, sometimes undressing them while singing bawdy songs. Laughter pressed close to the door. Then the vigil, neighbors lingering outside for sounds that would confirm the union. No one pretended this was simply romance. It was contract, property, lineage, and proof had to be audible, even visible. Bloodied sheets could be displayed as evidence of Virgo intacta. If no blood appeared, a bride could face disgrace, accusations of deception, even violence. Some girls pricked fingers or used animal blood to protect themselves from ruin. This wasn't a quirk. It was a system in which a woman's body was ledgers and signatures. The church did not leave desire to chance. Medieval theologians carved rules into everyday life. Saint Jerome warned that a husband who loved his wife too ardently verged on adultery, not with another woman, but with pleasure itself. Thomas Aquinas systematized when and how marital sex could occur, certain holy days forbidden, seasons of fasting, and a single licit position, face to face, man above, as natural. Acts outside those boundaries were condemned as sinful or against nature. Sex during menstruation, pregnancy, or breastfeeding, forbidden. Oral sex, forbidden. If all prohibitions were obeyed, some calculations suggested couples had surprisingly few permitted days each year. Whether or not real people followed these rules strictly, the fear of breaking them seeped into daily life. Imagine Margot when Henrik reached for her on a Wednesday in Lent. Refusal could invite anger in a world that normalized domestic violence. Consent, meanwhile, came wrapped in dread of eternal punishment. In that space, pleasure became a dangerous commodity. Medieval medicine inherited flawed ancient ideas. Women were often described as inverted men, vaginas as inside-out penises, ovaries as internal testicles. This wasn't idle ignorance. It was university-taught knowledge, and it shaped how people explained female desire. Some physicians argued women needed prolonged stimulation or even orgasm to conceive. Courts sometimes twisted this into the cruel claim that pregnancy disproved rape, implying enjoyment. Pseudoscience became legal weaponry. There were also fears of the wandering womb. Physicians believed the uterus could roam inside the body, upward to suffocate the heart, downward to escape. Treatments ranged from perfuming the vulva to lure the womb home, to foul odors at the nose to drive it away. Desperate, dangerous, and wrong, but sincerely believed. Alongside scholastic medicine ran folk medicine, practiced by midwives and wise women. The line between healing and witchcraft was razor thin. Under the full moon, women gathered pennyroyal and tansy, brewed into teas meant to prevent pregnancy. The dose between contraception and poisoning was perilously narrow. Mandrake, shaped like a human figure, was worn as a fertility charm. Counterfeits were sold in markets. The church condemned many of these practices, but need is stubborn. A woman might pray to Saint Margaret for safe childbirth, bless her bed with holy water, and quietly tuck a piece of amber between her breasts to guard a pregnancy. Survival mattered more than orthodoxy. Without reliable contraception, women lived with chronic risk. Childbirth could be lethal. Mothers and infants died so often that communities evolved rituals of loss alongside rituals of birth. Unmarried pregnancy meant social ruin. Options narrowed to concealment, exile, or worse. Infanticide was officially condemned, yet desperation has always bred terrible decisions. It's hard to quantify medieval maternal mortality with precision across centuries and regions, but the reality is simple. Childbearing was dangerous, and the burden of that danger sat on women's bodies. Medieval law often treated rape as a crime, against the man who owned the woman, father, husband, lord, rather than against the woman herself. Punishments varied wildly by class. A peasant assaulting a noblewoman might be mutilated or killed. A nobleman attacking a peasant woman might pay a fine. Adultery laws targeted women. A husband could kill an adulterous wife, caught in the act, with relative impunity, while male infidelity carried far lighter consequences. A woman's reputation was brittle. A glance lingered too long, a conversation with the wrong man, and the village rumor mill could turn livelihoods to ash. A man's sexual success was tied to status, martial prowess, and honor. Impotence was public shame. Whole vocabularies bloomed to veil humiliation. Official doctrine insisted the missionary position was the only licit one. Woman on top inverted natural order. Rear entry was derided as bestial. Yet literature, fablio, ribald tales recited in markets and taverns, tells a more complicated truth. People experimented. What the church forbade, the body sometimes pursued. Among the elite, private marriage manuals whispered advice about techniques and timing, a parallel literature of pleasure guarded by privacy and money. The night itself was haunted. Succubi and incubi, sexual demons, were treated as theological and medical realities. A succubus might seduce men in dreams. Emissions or sexual thoughts could be blamed on her. An incubus could overpower women. Those who reported inexplicable night experiences might be accused of consorting with demons. What we now recognize as sleep paralysis, the pressure on the chest, the inability to move, became evidence of supernatural assault. Remedies ranged from prayers and exorcisms to suspicion and fire. Menstrual blood was feared as toxic, able to sour wine, blight crops, dull knives, and sap male vigor. Some communities barred menstruating women from church or kitchens, or made them keep apart. The story of Eve colored everything, menstruation cast as punishment for original sin. Women, as always, adapted. They used moss, rags, or sheepskin as protection. They tracked cycles by lunar phases and shared herbal knowledge in female networks, quietly, because male authorities might brand such knowledge as sorcery. Among nobles, courtly love, the poetry of troubadours, elevated desire into a spiritual quest. The ideal romance was unfulfilled, refining the soul through yearning. Marriage was for property and heirs. True love lived in verse and longing. Peasant reality was different. A girl might prefer the blacksmith's son, but if the miller offered better terms, family survival decided her fate. In some regions, engaged couples shared a bed separated by a board. A bundling meant to test compatibility without violating doctrine. Communities kept watch. Privacy was scarce. Pagan roots ran deep beneath Christian soil. May Day processions, gathering flowers and branches, retained undeniable sexual currents. Young people slipped into forests at night. February often saw a spike in births. Weddings mixed holy water with secret herbal charms to bless fertility. People did what people have always done. They layered magic, medicine, and faith to try to steer fate. Many believed both sexes produced seed, and that conception depended on their proper mingling. Astrologers advised on when to conceive for a male heir. Phases of the moon and positions of stars were thought to shape not just the baby's sex, but character and destiny. Commanders sometimes demanded abstinence before battle to conserve vigor. Kings timed intimacy for lucky skies. This wasn't frivolity. It was the calculus of dynasties. The church extended its reach through confession, demanding intimate details in the name of salvation. Parish networks gathered rumors. Inquisitors' handbooks cataloged questions that probed into positions, frequency, even sensations. The same culture that preached chastity also compiled encyclopedias of sin, enumerating acts in excruciating detail. Knowledge was power and control. Municipalities often regulated brothels, taxes, inspections, designated clothing, and districts. The church condemned prostitution, but secular authorities saw it as a pressure valve, a way to protect respectable women by channeling male desire elsewhere, a logic both cynical and revealing. As for chastity belts, popular imagination exaggerates their use, but the idea endures because it captures the era's obsession with policing female bodies. Whether physical locks were common or not, the metaphorical locks, law, reputation, surveillance, were everywhere. You've heard of it. A lord claiming a peasant bride's body on her wedding night. Historians debate whether droit du seigneur ever functioned as an actual legal right. But the myth persists because it speaks a darker truth. Peasant women's vulnerability under feudal power. Whether demanded as coin, custom, or threat, the point was control. Privacy was a luxury few could afford. Peasant homes were 1 or 2 rooms. Sex often happened within earshot of children, in-laws, servants. Sounds and smells were part of domestic life. The nobility enjoyed private chambers, draped beds, and enough space to experiment beyond the eyes and ears of neighbors. That's one reason elite advice manuals could dare to be frank. So we return to Margot, 15 years old, a leather cord at her throat, a husband at the doorway, the cottage breathing with smoke and fear. What presses on her isn't just a man's hand, it's a civilization. church rules that make pleasure suspect and position salvation between sheets, medical truths that make her body a riddle to be solved by men who never bled, laws that prize her virginity as currency and her silence as virtue, neighbors who listen at doors and demand proof, a mother who taught her what could be spoken and what must be hidden. The medieval bedroom was never truly intimate. It was public, political, and often dangerous. Yet even here, human desire proved resilient. Lovers slipped notes into prayer books. Wives learned the herbs that soothed cramps. Husbands ignored forbidden calendars. People found ways to claim small corners of joy. It's easy to dismiss medieval sexuality as ignorance or cruelty. But these practices emerged from an intricate lattice of doctrine, economy, custom, and fear, and from the same human needs we know today: connection, security, belonging, children, pleasure. When we examine their rules, we see our own more clearly. The ways modern cultures also police bodies, attach honor to them, and transform private life into public virtue. Understanding medieval intimacy doesn't excuse the harm. It explains the machinery. It lets us watch belief become policy, policy become ritual, and ritual become the texture of everyday life. The candlelight still flickers across Henrik's face as he reaches for young Margot. But now we understand the weight in that room, not only fear and superstition, also the stubborn spark of human longing. Against doctrine and danger, people still sought tenderness. They still tried to stitch moments of care into a fabric woven from rules and risk. And that's the paradox the Middle Ages leave us with. Sexuality is always about power, but it's also always about people. Even when the bedroom is a battlefield, the heart keeps trying to make a home.